The day started like any other for Thomson Fly 3894. The Boeing 737-800, a sturdy and reliable aircraft, was scheduled for a flight from Manchester, UK, to Lanzarote, Spain. The pilots, Captain David Reynolds and First Officer Mark Evans, had completed the pre-flight briefing, checked the weather conditions, and reviewed their fuel and alternate airport options. Everything appeared normal. Passengers boarded with excitement, many heading for a relaxing vacation in the Canary Islands. The cabin crew assisted travelers in settling in, securing overhead baggage, and performing the usual safety demonstrations. The engines roared to life as the aircraft taxied to the runway, awaiting takeoff clearance from Air Traffic Control, ATC. As the aircraft accelerated down the runway, the pilots maintained their usual composure. At rotate speed, Captain Reynolds gently pulled back on the control column, and the nose of the aircraft lifted off the ground. The wheels left the tarmac, and Thomson Fly 3894 was airborne. The plane climbed steadily, passing through 10,000 feet, and passengers relaxed as the aircraft settled into its cruise. Then, a slight but unusual vibration ran through the aircraft. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. Captain Reynolds, experienced but always cautious, glanced at the instruments. "Did you feel that?" he asked First Officer Evans. Evans nodded. "Might be light turbulence." But as the aircraft climbed past 20,000 feet, the vibration intensified. The pilots scanned their instruments for any anomalies. Engine performance was normal, and there were no warning indicators. The aircraft continued to climb, yet something felt off. Then a sudden and unexpected jolt shook the aircraft. Felt like the plane had momentarily lost stability. In the cabin, passengers gasped as some felt their seats shift slightly. The seatbelt signs were still on, but a few had unbuckled to stretch. Now, a wave of uncertainty filled the air. The pilots glanced at each other, their hands instinctively gripping the controls. Something wasn't right. The aircraft had now reached its cruising altitude of 32,000 feet over the Atlantic. The sky outside was clear, with no turbulence warnings in the area. Yet the Boeing 737's behavior was becoming erratic. The unusual vibrations had intensified into sudden pitch and roll movements, making it difficult to maintain a steady flight path. Captain Reynolds immediately switched the autopilot to manual control. "I don't like this," he said. "Something's interfering with stability." As soon as the autopilot disengaged, the aircraft violently banked to the right. Alarms blared in the cockpit, and the flight deck was suddenly filled with flashing warnings. "Stall! Stall! Stall!" The synthetic voice of the aircraft's warning system cut through the noise. First Officer Evans grabbed the control yoke, applying left input to counteract the sudden roll. "We're losing control," he shouted. The aircraft was now nosediving, losing altitude at an alarming rate. Passengers screamed as they felt themselves pushed against their seatbelts, the force of gravity pulling them downward. "Throttle to idle. Pitch up," Captain Reynolds barked, his training kicking in. Evans struggled against the yoke, attempting to stabilize the Boeing 737. The control inputs felt sluggish, almost as if the aircraft was resisting their commands. At 28,000 feet, the plane began to level off, but now a new problem emerged. The aircraft entered a series of uncontrolled oscillations, rolling violently left and right. The rudder and ailerons responded unpredictably. It was as if the plane had developed a mind of its own. In the cabin, overhead compartments burst open, sending luggage falling into the aisles. The passengers clung to their armrests, many praying. The flight attendants, strapped into their jump seats, tried to remain calm despite the chaos around them. "ATC, this is Thomson Fly 3894. We have a major control issue. Request immediate assistance," Captain Reynolds radioed. "Thomson 3894, can you clarify?" The controller's voice came through. "We are experiencing severe control instability. Multiple warnings. Need emergency descent procedures." Every second counted. The pilots were fighting against the aircraft's erratic movements, working together to analyze the issue while keeping the aircraft airborne. Captain Reynolds quickly ran through the emergency control checklist. "Check. Hydraulics, trim settings, and rudder response," he ordered. Evans scanned the panel. Hydraulics are operational. Trim seems normal, but rudder effectiveness is compromised. We might have a rudder hardover or control surface malfunction. A rudder hardover meant that the rudder might have jammed or overcorrected, causing the plane to yaw aggressively and roll uncontrollably. This type of malfunction had caused crashes in the past, and if not addressed immediately, it could send the Boeing 737 into a fatal dive. Captain Reynolds made a crucial decision. We have to disable rudder input and try to regain pitch control using trim and throttles. Evans quickly adjusted the rudder input settings, reducing hydraulic pressure. To the rudder system, the plane suddenly snapped back into a level attitude, a sign that they might have temporarily solved one part of the problem. Throttle up slowly, Reynolds instructed. The engines responded smoothly, and for a brief moment it seemed as though they had regained control. But then, without warning, the plane violently pitched upward. Stall! 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 The alarm blared once again as the aircraft teetered on the edge of an aerodynamic stall. Damn it! We're getting extreme trim shifts, Evans shouted. The plane was caught between stalling and diving, behaving unpredictably. Passengers continued screaming as the aircraft rocked violently. The Boeing 737 was still not responding as expected, leaving the pilots with a narrow window of survival. Captain Reynolds had no choice but to declare a mayday. Mayday, mayday. Thomson Fly 3894, severe flight control issues. Request immediate emergency landing at the nearest airport. The aircraft was rapidly descending. The pilots initiated emergency descent procedures, struggling to keep the plane stable while aiming for an airport within range. ATC responded. Thomson 3894, divert immediately to Faro Airport. You are cleared. For priority landing. Reynolds adjusted the heading, but they were still losing altitude too quickly. We're not going to make it if we don't stabilize, Evans yelled. Reynolds made another critical call. Cut engine power to idle and use the aircraft's aerodynamic surfaces to slow descent. It was a gamble, but one that just might work. With every ounce of skill and experience, the pilots managed to regain partial control just in time. As the aircraft approached Faro Airport, Reynolds and Evans coordinated their final approach. The flaps and landing gear deployed despite some warning errors. The runway was in sight. Brace for impact, Evans shouted. The Boeing 737 touched down hard, bouncing once before coming to a screeching halt. Fire trucks and emergency crews rushed to the scene. As the plane came to a stop, there was an eerie silence in the cabin, then an eruption of cheers and sobs. They had survived. The investigation that followed would reveal a terrifying truth, but that was just the beginning of the story.